addiction. Well, as a minister, we realized that there were so often really serious problems that would come to my desk, to my prayer table, because of pain and suffering caused by addictions. I had a very friend, a PTA mom actually, who was a friend of mine before I became a minister, who was a member of the Weston Congregational Church, where I was serving as the associate minister. And during the time after I had left the church, until a couple of years ago, I had heard that she was struggling with alcoholism. It started fairly innocuously. She was raising her 4 kids. Her husband traveled a lot. It was just simply, a glass of wine that she would pour when she was cooking a meal, until the alcohol started taking over her life. And she was a wonderful wife, kind, giving person. And she died about 1.5 years ago, losing her battle with alcoholism. And her husband, at the eulogy of her funeral, spoke very honestly about her battle. And while I was sitting in that pew, I began to realize, and I think God was actually calling me to learn more about the biology and psychology of addiction, so that I could be a better service in my ministry. So I took a class on the biology of addiction, part of the state program on drug and alcohol rehabilitation counseling. And so I just really kind of want to share you a little bit about what I learned today, very concise, really summary of what addiction is. We'll talk about the cause, the result, the biology, and healing mind and body, and 12-step spirituality, a path to wholeness. And I used to think that 12-step was just for, substance abuse addiction, but it's not. 12-step spirituality can be used for all types of personal issues. People who are dealing with unforgiveness, for instance, have found 12-step spirituality to be quite helpful. And so why do we even talk about this during Lent? Because Lent is actually an opportunity for a 40-day mid-course life correction, really. I think Lent shares much of the sentiments of all of the mystic religions of a narrowing of a way. We always think of our denomination as being very open, the doors are wide open, but in essence, to practice any faith that matters, that means anything, it means that you give something up in order to have something new. In the beginning of Lent, we talk about metanoia, about turning. And I believe that Lent is an opportunity for us to address sincerely and honestly and heartfelt the things in our life that need some correction. It may be a minor correction in 1 year, and it may be a major correction in another year. So even if you are personally struggling with addictions, or have family or friends who are, I hope that you'll find something this morning that you will hear about your own opportunity for mid-course correction. Now, with the lovely advent of creative YouTube videos, I'm going to show a short, three short videos that I think do a really good job explaining what addiction is.
All the substances of abuse, whether they're opiates or cocaine or anything else, they're actually painkillers. Some of them specifically are painkillers. But with physical pain and emotional pain, the suffering is experienced in the same part of the brain. So when people suffer emotional rejection, the same part of the brain will light up as if you stuck them with a knife. The Eckhart Tolle says very nicely that addictions begin with pain and end with pain. So that all the addictions are attempts to soothe the pain. So when I work with addictions, the first question is always not why the addiction, but why the pain. And what you find is emotional loss or trauma. In the case of the severe addicts, as in the downtown east side here, they were every single one of them traumatized. There's no women walking the streets here who have not been sexually abused, not even by accident. But you know, whether it's a sex addiction or internet or relationship or shopping or work addiction, these are all attempts to get away from distress. Keith Richards, the Rolling Stone guitarist, said, who used to have a severe heroin habit, as you know, he said that all the contortions we go through just not to be ourselves for a few hours. Or why would somebody not want to be themselves? Because they're in too much distress and too much pain. So I don't care what they tell you about genetics or any of that choices or any of that nonsense. It's always about pain. Well, the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, it's got a wonderful line in it. Whatever you do, don't try and escape from your pain, but be with it. Because the attempt to escape from pain is what creates more pain. And that's the reality with addiction. But the question is, how can people be with their pain? Well, only if they sense some compassion from somebody. So as another teacher says, only when compassion is present will people allow themselves to see the truth. So addicted people need a compassionate present which will permit them to experience their pain without having to run away from it. And all the attempts to run away, it's like another teacher says, the surest way to go to hell is to try to run away from hell. So you got to be with that pain. You just have to be with it, but you have to have some support. And we live in a society that one way or the other is always about instant relief, quick satisfaction, distraction. In other words, we live in a culture that is based on, both economically and psychologically, on not supporting people to be with themselves. So it's always the quick getaway. So it's very difficult to deal with addictions in this society. But yeah, it is a matter of, at some point, finding a way of being with your pain so that you can actually get to know what it's really all about.
Was dying of cancer, and he had just tubs of every pill you could imagine, you know. I didn't know what they were, and I started taking them and feeling the effects, and reading the bottles and finding out what they were, and then selling them at school, and yeah, it just went downhill from there.
I was almost 400 pounds by the time I was 17. I had gastric bypass, and then that's when everything started falling apart. They took my food addiction from me. I couldn't eat anymore. And so I had to find something else to fill that void. And they gave me a few bottles of hydrocodone. I'd chug it. I wasn't in pain. I took it to get high.
My high school football team just caught a pass and it broke my middle finger. I got Vicodin and then I got prescribed Percocet. I was taking them like I was supposed to until someone asked if I was messed up on them, and I didn't know what that even meant.
The minute she walked in the house, she just sat on the couch and she started crying. My first thought is, oh my God, she's pregnant. And then she told me she was doing OxyContin, and so my first thought was, what's that? She told me she smoked it, which then totally blew me away because I just couldn't envision her doing that. It just didn't fit.
I think it has to do with like Orange County being a nice area and them trying to keep it low pro, trying to keep it under the rug, Maseratis and Lamborghinis and all that, like beachfront houses. And no one wants to see like, oh, we have this perfect family with the white picket house and the lab in the front yard. My kids are addicted to drugs. I just started feeling sick when I didn't have them, and it was just different. I didn't really know what it was at first. Like, I had no idea. I couldn't sleep, and my legs were kicking, and I was throwing up, and I was like, what the hell is this? And then I kind of came to terms with, I need drugs. One person knew of a doctor, and they would tell another person. We'd pay him cash, they'd write us a prescription, we'd go to the pharmacy, and we had our prescription for the month. Sometimes I was going to 3 different doctors in 1 month. I had a good amount of like 400 pills a month, and I was doing like 6 to 7 a day. It was getting so expensive when I said I could sell these for like $50 and go buy a gram. A gram of heroin was the price of 1 pill, and a gram of heroin could last you 3 or 4 days. 1 pill could last you a couple hours. So the calculation was simple, you know, just sell the pills that you get, make money, and get free dope. Since I was little, I knew heroin was the worst thing you could ever do. My father died of cocaine, I knew that. The biggest thing was using needles. And, I never said I would use needles. And within months, I was doing it all.
I didn't know what was going on because I had never been introduced to heroin before, up until the first night.
Heroin addiction is becoming a very, very large problem in affluent Connecticut for the route that was just described here. Teenagers find prescription painkillers in the medicine cabinets, get addicted, and indeed heroin is cheaper than those Vicodins and other oxycodones that are commonly prescribed. They are, the drugs aren't that much different than heroin. They just have a different name. A little girl who my son used to play with when they were little around the block, her and her boyfriend, who was also from Wilton, were doing heroin in their apartment outside of University of Connecticut, where they're both students. He OD'd and died. She was high, started covering up the crime, and she ended up spending some time in jail for that crime. This is in our neighborhood. This is not someplace far away. And this is a very simplistic little video from the NIDA on why drugs are so difficult to quit once you start them.
Ever hear someone with a drug problem talk about quitting? And then they try to quit on their own with no help. They tell their friends they've given up drugs forever. It usually doesn't work. Eventually they slip and start using again. Why are drugs so hard to quit? Because addiction is a brain disease. Addiction is when you feel a strong urge to keep taking a drug, even if it is causing harm. To stop, ask for help. Your brain is like a control tower. It sends out signals that direct your actions and choices. When you take drugs, the chemical signals in your brain change. This affects your choices, your actions, and even the way you feel. The part of your brain that lets you feel pleasure can be changed by drugs. Normally, this pleasure center is active when you eat, fall in love, or experience something else you enjoy. After a while, the drug becomes more important. When someone takes a drug, they first feel a rush or a high. But over time, the high is not as strong, and they need the drug to keep from feeling bad. This is what happens when you are addicted. But you don't have to stay that way. Quitting drugs is hard, but it can be done. If you or someone you love has a problem, get help.
what are some of the core beliefs of the addictive thought system? Fear, control, judgment, blame, scarcity. Oftentimes people who are becoming addicted to things will start exhibiting one or more of those behaviors, and oftentimes it's a way of alerting someone, either yourself or people around you, that indeed you may be walking towards a path of addiction. Addiction is generally thought of there where you become in a chemical dependency, if it's a chemical, or where it starts overthinking everything you want to do, and so pretty much your life becomes predicated on finding a way to feed that addiction at the expense of everything and everyone else around you. But I think oftentimes wise people, or wise people who have good friends around them, can sometimes make people aware of their addictions before they become abusive and become a problem. I think sometimes we live in a world, especially I think in the Northeast, where we're so concerned about boundaries that we often fail to speak truth and love to people, even though there might be an opportunity to help someone before they get to a really bad place, because we don't think it's our business. You know, we always have that word about it takes a village to raise a child. But I also think it takes a village to pay attention to people's addictions in our lives. And I also think it's important for churches, especially, to create opportunities where there are safe havens, you know, where people can come and feel like they don't have to drink to intoxication or drink socially without it being a problem. So I think it's something that we need to be aware of. Do any of these things sound familiar to you or people in your life? Consider these to be fair warnings. The result of that thinking is that you start looking for peace of mind outside of yourself. And basically an addiction is really saying to yourself that your internal self, you don't believe that you are indeed a beloved child of God, loved unconditionally by Him. And so you seek that type of love every place else but within. There's different types of addictions, alcoholism, drug abuse, and smoking, which they often term as dependency. And then, of course, there's other process addictions that are very alive and well. Pornography, I'm sure most of you know, has become an enormous problem for many, many people because it's so easy to hide, but can create that same type of obsessive thinking. Why don't we talk about pain as a doorway to recovery? Well, in framing Alcoholics Anonymous back in the 50s, God took a drunk stockbroker and a drunk doctor and gathered them around apparently other incurable alcoholics whose lives and relationships were in ruins. And out of this group, Alcoholics Anonymous was born. Alcohol was only the symptom, the occasion for looking at the self-centeredness that was at the roots of their problems. And many people believe that people only get to a place of recovery when they come to a great place of great pain. And oftentimes we'll see people spiral downward to a place where they have to choose between life or death almost. Interventions are developed in some ways for helping the people to face their pain. For them to hear from the people around them how much they care about them, how their addiction is causing them pain. It also is an opportunity for people to understand around the addict their own codependency and their own role that they may be playing in maintaining the facade that everything is okay when indeed it's not. Taking this class was very interesting because, you know, outside of the church world, they like to make it very clinical. And so when you talk about, God being a non-negotiable in healing, that becomes a little bit of a conflict. So indeed, someone could stop drinking or taking a drug or get off a chemical dependency, but if you haven't healed what's inside, oftentimes people just replace one addiction for something else, maybe physically less innocuous, but not necessarily emotionally or psychologically. So, the 12 steps. We can't fix our own pain, but God can. If we give up our agendas and surrender to His, trusting He is all-loving and all-merciful. So I want you to focus on that for a moment, because no matter where we are in our life, that indeed is what metanoia, what redemption, what the beginning of Lent asks us to do. To ask ourselves what in our lives, whether it be pride, ego, greed, anger, unforgiveness, whatever it is that we need to be able to take within that's causing us pain and offer up to God. And not to over-intellectualize it, but to really trust in miracle. Step 1. I admitted that I was powerless over my addiction, dysfunction, sin, and that my life had become unmanageable. Honesty. And some of those symptoms of our addiction are things that will give you a heads up as to whether or not you or yourself or your loved one is on a path that could require a simple minor correction at some point or a major one. Faith came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. And of course, I always think about the blind man who told Jesus, "Master, let me receive my sight." And Jesus said to him, "Go your way. Your faith has made you well." And Jesus also healed the paralytic and others as well. What Jesus saw in all those people who came to healing was a belief in something outside of themselves. Hope. I made a decision to turn my will and my life over to the care of God's inner power. Made a decision here is really critical to the story, because that's just step 1. It's just making a decision, and the rest of the 9 steps go forward to help people actually do the hard work once the decision is made. There's a saying in 12 step that's called the 1, 2, 3 step dance. Oftentimes, they get people to keep doing steps 1, 2, and 3 over and over and over again. But the next steps require action. It's a matter of moving from what's up here into what's here, into what's out there. You shall love your Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind, and with all your strength. That indeed is a scriptural passage that tells us that real change and real conviction requires mind, body, and soul, all of the above. And indeed it is a gift. This is where I think the understanding of grace becomes very powerful, because it's a gift. Grace is an unmerited, undeserved gift that God offers to us daily and profoundly for us to receive it. So all you have to do is, you don't have to do anything. You can be the most guilt-ridden, shameful, unforgiveness, scum of the earth. And Jesus says, come, and He will offer this gift of grace. And I think, to me, that is really, bottom line, these are really the core of our Christian values that are very unique to other faith stories. They're just so unique and so precious and so special. made a searching and fearless moral inventory of myself. I just got an email this morning that came from this Yale Center for Faith and Life from Miroslav Volf, who was a professor of mine there. And he teaches a class at Yale to the general Yale public, not just the divinity school. And he shared a short little blurb from a paper or a question from one of his students who was not a Christian. When he was talking about some of these Christian concepts, he was just talking about how he felt our culture tells us that what happened in the past is the past. You just move on from that, okay? Accept it for what it is and just move forward. And this message is completely antithetical to that. It tells us, no, you really can't move forward if you haven't really looked deep within. Integrity. This one gets pretty hard. This is confession. This is actually coming clean to your confessor, to God on a Sunday morning, to someone that you trust, to actually admit what was wrong. But there are caveats in this, which is, of course, to do no harm. You know, we don't get to confess to cause someone else more pain. That's not part of the deal here. But confession is very powerful. I've always been astounded at people's coming to the end of their life. The compulsion to confess is so deep. It's so deep-seated that we indeed want forgiveness. You know, is part of our human condition to feel whole and faithful. Willingness. Step 6, I'm entirely ready to have God's peace remove all the defects of my character. Once again, I think it's really important to focus on who's the acting agent here. It's God, isn't it? Humility. This is a radical shift from an anxious or intellectual faith to a spiritual life of trust in God. That is basically getting up every morning and saying, I'm yours, God. Lead me, guide me. Because indeed, He is in charge. And it sounds scary and frightening, and probably is for many people, but there's incredible freedom in that. Incredible freedom. Steps 8 and 9, this is responsibility. This is assuming that you've made your confession to God. The next step is to go and be reconciled to those whom you have wronged. Once again, as long as it is done, doing no harm. We actually read these scriptures, when we take communion on the first Sunday of the month. And many people believe that one shouldn't take communion until you've actually been reconciled, to come to the table with a clean and pure heart. I go back and forth on that. Sometimes I think we need the substance in order to go forward and do that. But there's something about coming to the communion table, knowing in preparation that you've been reconciled with your brother or sister. Step 10, perseverance. This is ongoing. We always know that once an addict, always an addict, once a drunk, maybe not drunk, but always a drinker. Sorry, the other way around. And that this is a daily journey. That every day we can stumble. And once again, I believe this is the great story of our Christian faith. That every morning, every night, we can ask God for forgiveness and walk anew and be reborn and refreshed in the Spirit, because Jesus Christ has done this for us. Even when we read those scriptures from Mark 14, we think about the temptation of Jesus, in the desert, and even Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, where it's very tempting to want to pass the cup of suffering on to somebody else, but we know a different way. Awareness. Once again, this is not something that one ever has to do on their own, but through prayer and meditation, the presence of God's inner peace for wisdom and the power to carry it out. For everyone who asks receives, and he who seeks finds, and to him who knocks it will be opened. You can see these 12 steps are indeed not just for people who are struggling with addictions. The messages are profound and helpful on all steps of our spiritual journeys. Discipleship. Just like Jesus told the disciples to go and make fishers of men, AA tells its members to go and be on the lookout and to be aware, and that's why they have their sponsorship. And everyone has a sponsor in these programs, because it's difficult to stay on a path by oneself. I always think it's always good to bring people into our lives for accountability when we're trying to correct a wrong. I know I'm really serious when I want to lose weight. Is when I tell people I'm on a diet. If it's a secret, it doesn't happen. So when someone looks askance when I'm eating that second cookie or that piece of cake, it's like I know that I'm being held accountable. And also, I think people who have gone through that type of change, want to share the joy. They want to know that other people can be saved, that salvation is possible, redemption, metanoia is possible for someone new. I went to an AA meeting once as part of my class homework, and I was amazed at the honesty that was there. They always tell the addicts lie, but this was actually down at Norfield Hospital. It was during the day. Some of the people come off the streets. They weren't people who necessarily, lived in, here. But they were very honest, and I was there to observe. And people looked at me at great askance, like, well, where's your story? And I have intellectualized this, well, I'm just here to learn, and I'm not really part of you. But, I felt really awful after I left. I felt awful because, of course, I have a story. Of course I have a story. Everyone has a story of a battle with something that you came to God and you confessed it and you changed because of that confession and forgiveness. And I was disappointed. I disappointed them and myself by not entering into that safe space of honesty. So be well. I hope you'll take some of these messages of 12 steps and bring them into your life. Any questions? Thoughts?
Well, just maybe playing off, the view that addiction is reaction to pain, and reflecting on our society. I wonder how you would respond. It seems like when we hear things like heroin addiction is going up dramatically, painkiller addiction is going up dramatically. If you think that's a reaction to pain, you'd say, well, therefore there's a lot more people in pain. I wonder if it's just because of our society, not only pressure, but availability.
Yes.
And so my concern is just, it's a lot easier, if you will, to be exposed to these addictors, if you will, painkillers and other things, even, in our society. And I wonder how you respond to that, especially as we think about, our environment that forces a certain way we should look, and even things like work addiction and such. Is it addiction because of trying to perform to more availability, or is it really that there are a lot more people in pain today?
I think that the first video I showed you pointed out to that pretty dramatically, which is our desire for the quick fix. When something sad happens, guess how you're supposed to feel? Sad. We don't allow emotions anymore. What do people do now? Most of the people say, you feel sad, go to the doctor and get an antidepressant. I truly believe that we forgot how to live with discomfort, with change, with loss. I saw my daughter, I have 3 children, 28, 26, and 21. My oldest was my daughter. And when she was in high school, she told me one day that almost all of her friends were on antidepressants. And I said, you know, being a teenager is hard. It's hard. It's a rupture of moving from a childhood to adulthood. The stresses on these kids are profound. There's no question. But do you medicate it, or do you just live with it? It's just it goes even to antibiotics, where someone's got a sniffle and they go to the doctor and they demand antibiotics, even though for things that aren't going to even help them. We've kind of brought into this thing that we're not supposed to feel anything anymore. You come home from work and it's like, I had a tough day, you pour a drink. And I say, well, maybe you just had a tough day, you're not supposed to pour a drink. Or maybe there's things in your life that need changing. And all these things do is numb the reality and take away the incentive to actual change, so you don't get to a place of all that pain. The reason I showed you the 2 videos with the suburban junkies is because I actually believe that some of the suburban junkie stuff that goes on is just kids being stupid. That it's not even so much pain as it is dumb. But they don't even realize that this little quick fix they're looking for on the weekend just because it's fun to go out and drink or whatever, have a good time, and to feel the temporary euphoria has extraordinarily biological and dangerous consequences on it. But I hear you. I don't want to think that everyone's in pain, that we've created a situation where our children are taking these things because they hurt. I think that is part of it, but I also think there's a part of things where we don't accept any discomfort and that we seek temporary elation without the complete knowledge of what kind of consequence that can bring to your life.
To your point then, if again, addiction, avoiding pain, you know, it seems like our society, to your point, encourages that more and more. There are more ways to avoid pain through covering it up.
Yeah.
And so in some ways, I think we're, you know, I'd say a more addictive society, not because necessarily we're in deeper pain, it's just maybe there's more of it's more acceptable to try to avoid it.
And I think as parents, I would be very careful about the own language that you use. You come home to the house and you say, I need a drink. What are your children hearing? You need this outside stimulus in order to make you feel good, right? I would be careful about externalizing things that need to be internalized. You know, what do you think might be a good thing to do about that? Help children internally problem solve, and not to just do a quick fix. And I think that parenting. I struggle as a mom. I struggle with my friends sometimes who see things differently than I do on some of these things. To me, I think pain and sadness are just human conditions that we get to feel sometimes, and that's okay. That's okay. The dog died, let's cry. Anything else?
Well, I think to your point, I think that the pain and sadness of a parent is contagious to the child.
Yes.
And they see that as a coping mechanism.
Yes.
And I think that's probably why kids are stupid, for sure. You know, they do stupid things, but I think they also are learning from their parents. And what we're seeing now are kids learning those coping mechanisms. So they are drinking and they're doing drugs at a very young age. You know, some because they're learning this at home, and some because they think that they just do have this pain, and they don't know what to do with it. They can't go to their peers. They feel that they'll be judged by adults, and it's really becoming quite a problem. And kind of begs the question: how do we as adults help these children at a young age learn to have those emotions? I think learning to embrace those emotions is a very difficult thing as a child and as an adult.
Absolutely.
And especially a teen.
Absolutely. And, I had the joy of having their son confirmation class last year. He was delightful. I didn't know. And I think he was, if anything, very verbally expressive on some of the things that he felt. So whatever you're doing, you're creating a good space for your son in that environment.
It's I can only manage what's mine, but I think that for my children, what I'm trying to get them to do, and if one of them wasn't sick right now, they would be here, or he would be here. is how do they help their peers, which is a hard thing for them to do. Because I think that is really their role right now. Once they are comfortable with who they are and they can handle their sadness, how do they help their peers? And that's a challenge.
Right. I think creating space for people that, as you talk about how I feel.
Mm-hmm.
Just the I feel words can be so powerful, you know, and so wonderful. Well, I think it's time, I don't know what time it is. Okay. I think you're right, just helping people learn how to express their emotions in a way that isn't judgmental.
Yeah.
And that it's okay, and emotions are okay. You know, they come from different cultures too, you know what I mean? I'm Greek. I came from the Midwest. I have a little different feeling about, I'm a little more upfront with how I feel and stuff. And my husband is like, you know, the opposite, right? I mean, so, you know, so in our household, we've had to learn in our own family how to deal with these completely different family systems that we grew up with.
Yeah.
You know, so it's, in culture is powerful.
Yeah.
Very, very powerful. Especially with boys.
Yes.
Boys, teaching boys how to be, you need to teach your boys to be good partners in life, is good husbands.
And expressive, yeah.
And be expressive. And sometimes I will simply ask my boys, how do you feel about something? And Barney will squirm and leave them alone. And I'm like, well, it's important.
That's when you gotta get them alone.
Barney right now. Time for church.
I guess the next question would be for me is how do you bring this message into a high school discussion for kids?
Yeah.
Kind of the next.
If you want to talk about that,
I would love to talk about
it.
that.
Okay.
Because I think it's really important for what I'm hearing.
I may be wrong about this, but I'm an observer, and I look at my friends, I look at the people around, I look at the children in the center, particularly, I watch them. And I see in everyone basically a lack of joy. I don't see joy in people's lives, in people's faces. Just the joy of being alive, being able to be with friends, being able to enjoy the deer in the backyard. Or, you know, it's
Joy is a counteractive, it's the other side of grief. You get them both.
And how do you bring that into the mix?
It's a big question. More than I can handle.
You know, for an answer.
Anything else?
I think this is true. Also, what Jill was saying, I think it's not just teaching the kids to, come to terms with their sadness or their grief or their pain, but I think parents have to set the example. They have to step back from all the stuff that they're occupied with and engage their kids to appreciate what they have. So, like when we leave church on Sundays, even if by force we said, no, we're not watching TV because it's Sunday, because they don't watch it during the week, we go for a hike. It's 25 degrees, it's so nice, and I'm like, no, we're going for 2 hours, we're going to walk off Bradley Road, or we're going to take our bikes or something like that. Well, we do that, we go outdoors, we get some fresh air, and we spend quality family time. And we're probably the only family, because we could call up their friends, but they're at the mall, they're at the movie. It's mind-boggling. You can do so much with your kids and teach them so many good things without really having to spend money, but it makes a huge difference in the emotional impact that you have on your kids as a result of you dropping everything and just being simple.
We're speaking to the concept of what I call the love thing, of social currency. When you spend time with your children, those things, that it gives you something that you can feed off of.
Right. And I think that makes a huge difference.
I think there's a lack of connection with people, which speaks to your point as well. It's how to make people just enjoy. There's less connection with people. And there's this great book by Dr. Laura Markham, I forgot the name of it, but it's called Connected Parenting. So it's the loving, that packet gets empty. You just spend 10 minutes of special time with your child, with no distractions, and you just connect. And the more technology we have, and I think that's why pain is becoming more prevalent as time goes on. So I think there is an increase in pain because there's a decrease in connections.
Gotcha.
So the faster we become, the less connected we are to people, the more alone we feel, more disconnected and more pain. So I think what's missing is just that enjoyment of hiking, no television, no internet,
No camping.
hold hands, walk the dog, and there's just no, just being.
Yes.
Because we have to be doing something, and this, and there's shopping, and there's errands, and there's working, and so there's just not that simple connection anymore.
Absolutely. Because in that connection, it goes back to what we talked about. In that connection, you feel love. And ultimately, so often, a lot of this consequence is a lack of just feeling loved for who I am. Well, praise be to God. Thank you for coming this morning. And we're going to cover a couple of topics the next time.